Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. Except I'm not actually talking about electronic music today. I'm talking about the new album from Alan Parsons called The Secret. Okay, so yeah, this album is not electronic. As such, I will not be giving it a score at the end. Not to mention it just came out today, so I'm not going to act like I have a really solidly formed opinion on this. But I felt like I kinda had to do this one real quick, because I got a lot I need to get off my chest about this album. This isn't like that one time where I made that video saying I liked Steven Wilson's To the Bone. This one, as you can tell by the fact that I've got the camera and script in the usual places, is a bit more of a loaded topic. Thing is, first of all, my love for Alan Parsons goes way, way, way deeper than my love for Steven Wilson. I've mentioned the guy a few times, both when I mentioned the Alan Parsons project I, Robot as my number 15 favorite electronic album of all time, and when I got to see said project perform live almost a year ago. But I'll make it clear right here. Alan Parsons is one of the greatest producers/engineers of all time. This guy was the assistant engineer on the Beatles' Abbey Road, and the lead engineer on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, to name a few relevant examples. And he produced for Steven Wilson once. And the band he formed with Eric Wolfson, the Alan Parsons Project, is quite possibly my favorite non-electronic band ever, excluding the Beatles. They don't really count, though. The project delivered 10 albums from 1976 to 1987 that are all fantastic. At their worst, a collection of really solid tracks like Vulture, Culture, and Stereotomy. At best, delivering some of the most brilliantly realized symphonic rock and prog rock concept albums that I've listened to so much they feel like they're just a part of me. See I, Robot, Turn of a Friendly Card, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, etc. I also need to credit him for being like the first producer/engineer to more or less become a recognizable household name in popular music. Sure, nowadays you get EDM artists like Calvin Harris who are well-known producers that your average person could recognize. But there was no EDM culture in the 70s. There was no producers that you knew in the 70s besides Alan Parsons. And George Martin, maybe. But I'll admit my love for Alan Parsons didn't actually guarantee that a video like this would be a thing. First of all, you'll note that this album is by Alan Parsons and not the Alan Parsons Project. This isn't the first album that Parsons did solo, well, solo as in without Eric Wolfson. This is the 5th Alan Parsons album. And the non-project albums I don't personally hold in quite as high regard, even if they do at least all have their moments. Try Anything Once in 91 was solid front to back, On Air in 96 was forgettable. The Time Machine in 99 had an absolutely incredible opening track, but didn't really offer anything essential otherwise. And A Valid Path in 2004, well, that one starts with a collab with David Gilmour and Simon Posford from Spangle, of all people. That one's pretty underrated, if you ask me. But yeah, I was kind of expecting to go into this album and maybe at best doing a quick video recommending the album, and at worst just tweeting things about it. After actually listening to it, I had so many things to say that I had just ended up doing this full-on video with the script and everything. TLDR, I think The Secret is a good album, if not really a great one. But my thoughts are a lot more complicated than that. Of the Alan Parsons solo albums, The Secret is the one that most sounds like a project album. It sounds like something in the Eye in the Sky era, right at the beginning of the 80s. There's a pretty clear overarching theme of magic and magicians. Like, the opener on this thing, much like the opener on A Valid Path, is the kind of thing I can't even believe exists. And in this case, I especially can't believe it exists in 2019. Like, this album starts with a cover of The Sorcerer's Apprentice? Yes, the piece from that famous segment in the movie Fantasia, given a full prog rock makeover with a guest guitar feature from Steve Hackett of Genesis and with the full orchestra behind him. That is a thing, and it is about as amazing as it sounds. Granted, we then go into Miracle, the pre-album single that initially had me kinda worried for this thing. I mean, it sounds like the project, like a cross between Eye in the Sky and Too Late from the Gaudi album. But Jason Mraz, of all freaking people, handles the vocals. I mean, he does fine, but he feels like kind of a weird fit. He took a couple of listens for me to warm up to. Also, somewhat disappointingly, the production wasn't that great. I mean, it was serviceable, but the instrumentation sounded kind of fake and MIDI-ish, even though I know it was all real instruments. That's admittedly the biggest thing about this album that prevents me from really wanting to go out of my way to recommend this to people. It's something that kind of carries through the whole thing. Some tracks definitely worse than others. Like, anytime there was a full orchestra, that was great. I already mentioned the opener, but One Note Symphony was a major highlight in that department as well. There's so much grand, sweeping orchestration, and it's really epic. And even in this album's worst moments, I still prefer the production on this thing to, like, the generic 90s rock of the bulk of The Time Machine. But it does lead to this whole thing being a big mixed bag. The Secret is also really ballad-heavy. Like, the only other track besides the opener in One Note Symphony that gets more energetic than Eye in the Sky level is Requiem, which kind of has this sense of, like, foreboding evil to its instrumental while kind of reminding me of earlier project tracks like Breakdown or Snake Eyes, with all these punchy horn sections and sax solos. That one kicks ass. But if you're not a fan of the sappier side of the project, I imagine this could end up being a bit of a letdown. Like, there's so many ballads on this thing. Like, Lou Gramm of Foreigner is on this thing too, and he gets a big symphonic ballad a la Old and Wise. A good one of the best ballads on here, but there's still a lot of tracks on here that sound kind of like Old and Wise. It is emphatically not an album you listen to get hyped. But what made my thoughts on this album so much more complicated than just being a more ballad-heavy than usual project-style album with somewhat underwhelming production that took a bit to grow on me, there's the lyrics. Once the track As Lights Fall came up, I hear Parsons himself handling the vocals on that one, and he's talking about this being his curtain call, and about going away, and I got a bit of a chilling feeling. Then I looked down and saw song titles like Requiem and Beyond the Years of Glory, or just Years of Glory, but whatever. I made it to the track The Limelight Fades Away. I hear a line about suffering in silence, taking your final bow, and I started to think, shit, is Alan Parsons dying? Alongside the whole magician theme this album had, there was a lot of talk of like death, or getting old, or moving on to the next life. There was this real finality to everything. It felt like Parsons was reflecting on the end of his life and just looking back on things. I mean, he never outright says, like, death or dying or that, but he pretty heavily hints at it in As Lights Fall and The Limelight Fades Away. Then I looked back at the album cover and title, The Secret, like he's keeping some kind of illness a secret, suffering in silence between shows, as it were. And then I saw, like, this path of magic wands towards a light in the distance. Maybe I was reading too deep into it, but I saw all this hinting at Alan Parsons hiding an illness and not being around for much longer and felt entirely plausible. I mean, the guy is 70. He's not exactly in his best years, as it were. I hope to God this doesn't turn out to be like Bowie's Black Star or George Harrison's Brainwashed, because I do not think I am emotionally prepared for Alan Parsons to be gone. That would cut significantly deeper than Robert Miles, to say the very least. Now, it could also be that this album is about Eric Wolfson, the other half of the Alan Parsons project, who actually did pass away in 2006. And I'm almost certain that's what the final track on this album, I Can't Get There From Here, I think that's what that's about. But it seems a bit weird to center it on Parsons' perspective like this does and frame it like this 13 years after the fact, so I don't know. I can't just ignore it either, because death, disappearing, vanishing, it feels like a central theme on this thing. I guess my opinion on The Secret as a whole depends on whether Parsons passes away in the next year or so. I will be completely fucked up if he does, but then this album is going to be all the more powerful because of it, and my opinion would be raised by a significant amount. Make all these ballads all the more meaningful and powerful. Though, on the flip side, if it turns out this isn't even his final album, I'll be much less enthusiastic about it. Its feeling of finality does bring a lot of weight to tracks that otherwise might not do as much for me. But okay, if you ignore all that lyrical context, This album is pretty good, but nothing really worth going out of your way for unless you're already a big fan of the Alan Parsons project like I am. It's pretty reliant on my nostalgia for the sound and style that the project did so well in the 70s and early 80s. Is probably not a good starting point if you've never heard a project album before. Go pick up I, Robot or Turn of a Friendly Card or Eye in the Sky first at the very least. I would not start here. But yes, those are my thoughts on The Secret. This was an album I enjoyed, if one that scares the crap out of me if I read into the lyrics a certain way. And I guess we'll see how much I return to it in the future. I imagine I'm going to stick to a couple of tracks and skip around others for the time being. There are a couple of moments on this thing that are amazing, but my thoughts on the lesser moments will also depend on the future of Alan Parsons himself, so yeah, take that all how you will. Again, no score here, A, because it's not electronic, and B, I have no clue what score I would even apply to something like this in the first place. Again, this album hasn't even been out for a full day, so you can take what I say with a grain of salt, but I had to get this all off of my chest as the longtime APP fan that I am. We'll return to regularly scheduled reviews very soon. Got a really big one in the works from this past February that I've been working through, a pretty meaty and brief segment. So look forward to that. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, you're making me a review, something, a link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.